The first thing that hit my mailbox was a white envelope. Heavy, official, the kind that makes your stomach take a step backward before your eyes even read the words. Violation, exterior color code. It said, like a verdict. They gave me 30 days to repaint or face fines that could eat a month of my paycheck. So I painted it purple. Look, I know how that sounds dramatic, petty, a guy and a color, but you have to understand the climb to that one dumb, glorious stroke. My name's Sam Harlow. I grew up in places where you learn to keep your head down, fix your own problems, and not make trouble for trouble's sake. I also grew up watching my mother patch the house she loved, paying attention to the small things so the big things didn't fall apart. This house, a little two-story with a crooked porch and a stubborn maple in the yard, was hers first, then mine. It carried all the quiet, ordinary care of a life lived without flash. I liked it that way, until the notices started. The HOA in our development at Cedar Ridge had rules about grass height, mailbox flags, the precise shade of beige you were allowed to display between the porch post and the eaves. At first it was letters about a crooked doormat or a bird feeder that hung too low. You answer, you comply, you file the receipt, you keep going. Over the years those letters learned my name like they were getting to know me, Sam Harlow. Guilty of being a visible person. The last one, the heavy envelope, wasn't about aesthetics. It was about control. I read the notice on my kitchen table with the sun pouring over the counter, and I thought about all the times a committee had told people what color their mailbox had to be while someone else sat on the board and used HOA checks like a personal wallet. I thought about the way Mrs. Ellison, the HOA president, smoothed her gloves before a meeting and made rules like they were scripture. I thought about the way being neighborly had become a litmus test for shutting people down. That afternoon I went to the hardware store and bought 1 gallon of paint nobody in our subdivision would dare call acceptable. I bought rollers, tarps, a brush that felt good in the hand. I stuck the tarp down at 2 in the morning and started with the back porch because if you're going to do something small and irreversible, start where you can do it alone. The first stroke looked ridiculous, like it meant nothing, and then the second stroke read like a decision that had been waiting on me for a long time. Morning is a cruel witness. The sun finds every color and tests it. When the neighbors came out, bleary-eyed, holding coffee cups and dog leashes, the way their faces caught that purple, you could see their surprise. Not every surprise is the same. Some are curious, some offended, some entertained. Riley from next door stood on her steps with her arms crossed and a grin that made it clear she was picking a side without asking. "That's bold," she said, and I wanted to say, "Yeah, well," but all I said was, "It's mine." You'd think that would have been the end of it, that a little color would fade into the tapestry of the street. Instead, it became a story. Someone took a photo, then another, and before I knew it, my front yard was a backdrop for opinions. The HOA sent the formal violation email that evening. The fine started ticking like a clock you can't turn off. The board convened a special meeting and, as if on cue, Mrs. Ellison called me at dinner and used her tone like a scalpel. "Sam, community standards matter," she said. "This isn't about you. It's about precedent." She didn't say the part she meant. Precedent that kept her in charge. Here's the twist, or maybe the part that felt like a twist: when you refuse to be small in a place that rewards smallness, other people see themselves differently. Some of my neighbors were furious, convinced my purple would depress property values. Some were privately relieved to have someone say no to the committee that ate up afternoons deciding the world's small injustices. Then a former board member dropped by with a manila folder and an offer. "We can help," he said. "Not with paint, with paperwork." What followed was the textbook escalation of small-town power plays. The HOA hired a lawyer. The letters became thicker and smellier with formal language. I filed my own documentation. I recorded conversations in the interest of transparency, and every recorded word was leveraged not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because the truth, once loud enough, tends to tidy up messes. It's funny how the neighborhood changed its stripes in a week. Someone put up a tiny purple ribbon on a mailbox. A woman I'd never seen before drove 2 hours and said, "I read about your house online." She brought cookies and a petition that had 40 signatures before the kettle was done. Riley started a Facebook group where neighbors discussed bylaws and whether the HOA had been following its own. The group found things that made you raise your eyebrows: missing meeting minutes, votes recorded without people present, invoices for landscaping that didn't match the receipts. Margot Ellison, the woman who used to smooth her gloves, stopped answering when people started asking for copies of the minutes she'd read from a podium. That was the moment it stopped being just about paint. It became about accountability. It became about whether the people who made rules would be held to them. She didn't go quietly. There were threats the HOA would place liens on properties, attempts to levy fines that doubled overnight. There were men in suits who came to the curb and told me, in careful tones, that community standards weren't optional. At the block party, I organized a block party, which is the most suburban way to start a revolution. Someone from the board prowled the edges and told me I was endangering property values. Riley shouted from the crowd, "You're endangering integrity." And for the first time, a lot of people laughed like the joke had always been on the wrong side. The confrontations got tighter, more cinematic. There was a moment late, rain on the asphalt, the streetlights making a pool on the pavement when Margot came up on my porch, her shoes precise, her eyes sharp as cut glass. "You think you can embarrass me?" she asked, and there was relief in the way her voice cracked. She had no idea I was more frightened by the idea of being anonymous than by her anger. "I'm not trying to embarrass you," I said. "I'm trying to live in my house." She sneered. "That house was a compromise, Sam. We all gave things up for a uniform community." She said it like a eulogy for a dream she thought she owned. I wanted to say, "You gave up the neighborhood when you gave up listening." But I didn't. Complicity wears a neat suit and has the last word in many small towns. Instead, I handed her a stack of printed bank statements and copies of minutes she'd failed to file. "Start listening now," I said, and for a breathless second her face showed something like fear. We took it to a hearing. We made it a public one. I used the lawyer who would work on a reasonable rate after she read the receipts and the note that said, simply, "We want transparency." The hearing was messy in the best possible way. Microphones, a TV crew, neighbors who told stories about meetings where decisions were made with no records, about fines levied like punishments from a king. The cameras found our purple house like it was scripted to be the face of defiance, and people started to remember what it felt like to have a voice. At the peak, the part you'd edit for drama. If this were a movie, the board's finances were scrutinized, and what we found was a tangle of misapplied funds and suspicious vendor agreements. It wasn't flashy crime. It was the slow, bureaucratic kind that eats neighborhoods from the inside out. Someone had been treating the HOA like a private account. People were stunned because corruption is often small and friendly in the beginning. A favor here, a payment there, and then it becomes a habit. Margot resigned in front of a crowd that had gathered on the green, a cluster of folding chairs and lawn signs, and the smell of grilled burgers. She read a prepared statement about moving on for the good of the community. She took one last look at the purple house and left. It wasn't a dramatic arrest or a courtroom show. It was neighborliness reasserting itself, messy, loud, and painfully satisfying. I won't pretend everything got fixed overnight. Bylaws changed, yes, but people still argued about mailbox flags and the height of hedges. That's how communities are, full of good intentions and stubborn opinions. The difference was that people were talking to each other instead of writing anonymous letters. The ribbon on my mailbox stayed for a while. We had new elections. We started posting minutes on a website, and for the first time in a long time, people read them. I learned something I didn't expect. Defiance doesn't have to be dramatic to be effective. Sometimes it's just a color on a wall that forces conversation. Sometimes it's a night with a roller in your hand and the audacity to keep painting when a letter tells you to stop. I learned that community is fragile and reparable, that power can look respectable and still be rotten, and that being ordinary, the guy who keeps his porch light on, who waters his maple, who remembers his mother's good china, is a kind of courage when it's threatened. So what do you think? Was I right to stand my ground to make my house a purple flag in a neighborhood that liked beige? Did the end justify the means? Did we go too far, or not far enough? Drop a comment and tell me where you land on this. Is it about property, or is it about who gets to decide how we live? Like, share, subscribe if you want more stories about the people who choose to stand up, or if you just like the sound of a paint roller at 2 in the morning.